Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Robert Spicer of the Communication Department here at Millersville University. When people think of Lancaster County and politics, probably the first name that comes to mind is James Buchanan, but after that, definitely close second, maybe first, even before James Buchanan, is our guest today. We have a special treat, the Honorable former Congressman Robert Walker of Lancaster County, who's joining us today for an interview with two of our Walker Fellows, Haley Williams and Chris Engel. And we're going to talk about we'll have three segments in the show today: the 2016 campaign, the status of our political culture, and then Walker's reflection on a career in politics. So let's start with the 2016 campaign. I think if you had told me a year ago that we would right now be talking about the possibility of a Trump candidacy, and that Bernie Sanders would be racking up tons of votes and really challenging, making Hillary Clinton give her a run for our money, I would have called you crazy, but here we are. So what are your thoughts on that? It seems like there's this sort of, or the pundit narrative is that there's a challenge to the power structures. Do you think there's this legitimate challenge to both parties' power structures in these Trump-Sanders campaigns, or is this just sort of a hiccup?
Well, first of all, I want to say that you didn't mention my hero, Thaddeus Stevens, as a part of your introduction. And
well, I didn't want to bump you down to number three.
Well, that's all right. Number three behind Thaddeus Stevens would not be a bad thing. One of my, as I say, great political heroes. But I think 2016 is not an aberration.
Okay.
I think it is a symbol that we are moving into a new century. That we are faced with a lot of issues that this nation and the world have never been faced with before. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of concern and even anger among people about that. Mm-hmm. And for many people, they think that the folks in office at the present time have brought them to this circumstance. Well, the fact is those folks are wrestling with these problems too, and they're wrestling inside at the federal level, a divided government, well actually at the state level too. Mm-hmm. And that's a real issue because in many cases what we have to do is move quickly to solve some of these problems as they arise. We're not able to do that in dysfunctional government at the present time. So what you're seeing is a reaction to the realities of the present day.
Well, and to go along with that, it seems to me, I was always taught in history class that the founders designed the government to move slowly because they didn't want the government to quickly take power and to infringe upon liberties, and that's part of the public's frustrations. The government is moving slowly, but it's supposed to move slowly, right?
Well, but the problem is that they meant for the policy mechanisms to move slowly. In other words, that power should be exercised carefully. Right. And so on. And so they designed it that way. The problem today is that we have piled on top of that a lot of bureaucracy that's unnecessary. In business, they have moved decision-making from the plant floor to the C-suite immediately. In government, we still have layers of bureaucracy that do decision-making. And so even after the policy is set, it sometimes takes years for the policy to be implemented. That's in a world where product cycles are 3 months. Yeah. And you really have a very, very different atmosphere in which government's operating, and we have not reformed government to make it into a functional entity in the modern economy.
Yeah, by the time the policy is implemented, the problem has changed.
The problem has changed completely, and in fact, in many cases, the policies are outdated by the time they're implemented.
Right. So do you think, has this anger that we're seeing, that at least the media are telling us is present in the public, has it trickled up into the culture of Congress and the Senate and at the state levels as well, or do you think that the elected leaders are sort of baffled by it all?
Well, the people keep saying over and over again, we want change. Obama was elected on the idea of change, and then they found out that his change was not exactly what they had in mind. And so you have candidates out there who run on these giant themes that sounds to the people like they're really going to do something, and then they face the realities of governing that are completely different from the realities of campaigning. Right. And so President Obama has faced that. Governor Wolf has faced that in Pennsylvania. But the members of Congress also face it because many of the policies that they want to pass, they get blocked
Right.
in the system and are not able to implement the change that people expected from them.
Okay, I think we're going to move to question number 2, and one of our Walker Fellows here will have a question.
As a former member of the House of Representatives, you have in-depth and hands-on experience working hand in hand with fellow congressmen and women. What candidate do you think would work best with the House right now?
Well, I'm pretty biased on the question of the presidential race because I'm a senior advisor to John Kasich's campaign. But one of the reasons why I chose John Kasich as a candidate is because I've watched him work in the Congress. We were together in the Congress. I saw him be able to balance the budget after it had not been balanced for about 20 or 30 years. And to show you the leadership that he provided, right after he left Congress, it went unbalanced again. Okay. And so that was done by cooperating with Democrats who were willing to come along with him. He worked in a collegial atmosphere and got things done in Washington. I believe as president, he would also be able to do that. That's where I am. I think that also it's important for people to have at least some executive experience. And the problem is that business executive experience doesn't always translate into government. Because in business, when you're the CEO of a company, you can say, we're headed this direction, and everybody salutes and falls in line. In government, you say we're headed in this direction, and all of a sudden there are 535 voices on Capitol Hill say, no, we're not. Right. You know, it's not exactly what I want, and so on. I like the general direction, but specifics I'm not for. And so part of the genius of governing is to assure that you can put majorities together in both the House and the Senate, and in the Senate put a supermajority together. And that takes a particular kind of executive experience that I think is very important in government.
So now, would you think that the group of candidates that we have right now on either side, do you think that, what are the differences between the positive and negative effects that they would have?
Well, again, I mean, I think Kasich brings that executive experience. I think he brings the experience in Congress. He has national security experience. But the fact is that you have 2 U.S. senators running on the Republican side that are still viable in it, and you know, both of them have experience on Capitol Hill, and so know something about the business of working there. And then you have Donald Trump, who is a concern for me because I believe that what he brings is an authoritarian style to government. Authoritarianism does not work in government under our Constitution.
Well, it's sort of like you said, he's coming from that CEO perspective where he expects people, he'll give an order and people will fall in line, and he will quickly learn that it doesn't work that way on Capitol
Well, and even
Hill.
in negotiations, when he talks about negotiations, he talks about the fact, that I imposed my will in these negotiations and I can do it again. That's not the case in government, and if he's going to do that, he's going to have to do it extra constitutionally, which bothers me.
Well, I'd like to ask one final question, then we'll break and head into then take a break and go to the next segment. Do you think any of the current presidential candidates on either side would have a significant down ballot effect? Because I know people running in Congress, running for re-election, would be thinking about that. What does this person above me do to the electorate that will affect my chances for re-election?
Yeah, I think the Democrats are very worried about a Bernie Sanders and so on, which is the reason why Sanders won't get the nomination of the Democratic Party.
You think he has a significant down ticket?
Yeah, remember, the superdelegates in the Democratic Convention and so on do have the ability to change things, and they're the people who are likely to have to run down ballot with Bernie Sanders, and they will not allow that because. And the same thing, many people believe that both Trump and Cruz would have down ballot problems. For instance, you have our senator in Pennsylvania.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see the possibility of Toomey surviving with a Trump or a Cruz at the top of our ticket in the state.
So if you're Senator Toomey, you're worried about a Trump candidacy right now?
I would think so, or a Cruz candidacy. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. We'll take a short break, and we'll be right back with our second segment. We're going to talk about the status of our political culture more broadly beyond just the 2016 election. Thank you. I'm Dr. Robert Spicer, and we're back with Congressman Robert Walker and our Walker Fellows. And we're going to go to Chris Engel now, who's going to ask our first question for the segment on the state of our political culture. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, in the first segment, we were just discussing how angry and frustrated people are becoming with the government. And you can see in the polls that people are just not happy with the way government works, and they're questioning, basically, does it work? So do you accept the premise of their anger, and what do you think can be done to fix our political culture, and if it needs to be fixed, or can people pretty much earn the public's trust back?
Well, I think the political establishment needs to understand the nature of the anger and needs to deal with it. The fact is that in the 20th century, we developed a political culture that was based upon government solving problems. And we formed whole programs out of the government sector to try to solve the problems. Today, individuals have been empowered in ways that they have never had power before, largely through the information revolution. The government has not yet caught up with that. And so what we need to develop is a culture in which people are involved in solving the problems at the local, state, and ultimately the federal levels. But the federal government ought to be doing overarching policies that then filter down to solutions at the local level. We're not there at the present time, and as a result, people don't see the results in their own hometown. They don't see the results in their own lives. And so the political culture needs to adapt to that and assure that, that the people who have been empowered with information are able to have the power to change their lives.
Well, following up on that, how much of this, part of it is people are angry, they think the government is the source of their problems, and they're angry at the elected officials. I think we don't talk enough about the responsibility of the public as well. So how can people, members of the public or how can we say to them, you're responsible for some of this, you need to exercise responsibility and do something to solve some of these problems. How do we get at that?
Well, Gavin Newsom, the lieutenant governor and possibly the next governor of California, wrote a book a while back, and he's somebody who I don't share a political philosophy with, but he captured some of this in his book. It's called Citizenville.
Okay.
And what it says is that we ought to say to people that if you see a problem, don't call up your local government official and so on. Organize virtually to solve the problem. Organize virtually in your neighborhood, organize virtually in your community, and so on, and solve the problem. And then once you have a solution set, then go to your local official and say, this is how we think this problem can be solved. What can you do to help us? Okay. You know, it's a very different way of looking at things than we have today, that people say, well, you know, I'm going to call up my congressman and get this fixed. Yeah. Well, the chances are that he can help you with an individual problem that's caused by government. He cannot help you necessarily reform your community.
One of the things that I talk to my students about, we discuss in multiple classes sort of the dirtiness or the ugliness of politics and our political culture. And I tell them about some of my favorite examples from history. In the 1800 election, John Adams supporters started a rumor that Jefferson was dead and circulated that through the Federalist Press. John Adams himself was, Jefferson supporters claimed that Adams sent Pinckney, his vice president, to England to get 4 women to be their mistresses. And Adams said, if this story is true, Pinckney has kept my 2 for himself. And in 1828, the John Quincy Adams supporters literally called Andrew Jackson's mother a prostitute. The words Andrew Jackson's mother was a prostitute appeared in pamphlets and newspapers. And I always point to those examples and I say to my students, as long as Donald Trump doesn't call anybody's mother a whore, we're better than what we were in the 1800s. The political culture isn't as bad as it was at other points. So I put that to you as a premise to either accept and run with or to knock it down. Do you think, am I right when I tell my students that things are bad, but not as bad as they have been at other points, or are things really ugly?
Well, things are pretty ugly these days as well, but it's true that in the 19th century, politics was a pretty rough and tumble process. And if you go back and read the newspapers of that time, it was very ugly.
Partisan press system.
And that was, but remember, Mark Twain at that time referred to Congress as America's only native criminal class. So I mean, this has long been a part of the body politic. But the fact is, we are undergoing such tremendous change at the present time that it's more reflective of the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when literally we turned the economic, the political, and the culture of technology and so on its head. We're going through that right now, and people are scared. And their fear and their anger is partially based because they're scared that they're losing the country that they thought they had, that their kids are not going to be as well off as they were. There are just a lot of things to be concerned about. And so that anger gets translated into a political system where there's an awful lot of shouting these days.
Right.
I think it will work itself out. But I do worry if we turn to authoritarians to solve the problem. That we still believe, if we believe as a country that these problems can be solved from the top down rather than from the bottom up.
Right.
That is a great concern because I think you have the potential of losing the Constitution at that point.
That you think is the biggest sort of political social threat.
That's the
to
threat.
the system.
That's the threat that I see in the political
If
system.
you could point to one big key thing, that's it.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, we're going to wrap up segment 2 there. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with segment 3. We're going to talk to Congressman Walker about his reflections on a life in public service. Thank you. I'm Dr. Robert Spicer. Welcome back, and we're here with Congressman Walker and our Walker Fellows, and we're going to talk now a little bit about Congressman Walker's reflections on a career in public service, and our Walker Fellows have a few questions about that.
So you served in the House from 1977 to 1997. Yep. Who were some political figures you looked up towards before joining the House that really had an influence on your career and your personal life as well?
Well, I mentioned before Thaddeus Stevens, who is a personal hero, and I'm a great fan of Thomas Jefferson and a tremendous fan of Winston Churchill. So I'd point to the three of them as probably the people that I tried to fashion a political career around.
Now, we mentioned earlier about Thaddeus Stevens being one of the more well-known politicians from Lancaster. He was a real big advocate for free education, and there actually is a school here, Thaddeus Stevens School of Technology and Trade. We were talking about this a bit earlier before filming about the push we need to make on vocational schools and tech schools and how that would help build the middle class rather than people going to four-year colleges and find themselves an extreme amount of debt, go to a two-year college, learn a trade, and get a job right out of that two-year school. Do you believe that vocational schools are the path to building our middle class again?
Well, it's one of the paths to it, and but it also involves these schools becoming a place where you can get lifetime education. It's not just getting that first phase of education.
Yeah.
It means that because of the rapidly changing technology in our world, you need to have a lifetime education program that assures that people can take those skills and upgrade them constantly so that they are always relevant to the marketplace.
And now, speaking on behalf of your background in academia, you served as a teacher before Congress.
I did.
And now a lot of students are majoring in either multidisciplinary studies or government, politics, among other social studies. And a lot have aspirations to become a politician and maybe go to law school before then. What do you think the necessary requirements or just good life experiences entail to become a successful politician?
I think it depends upon whether or not you want to service as a policy person, whether you're going to run for office and so on, and try to be a politician and ultimately a public servant. I found, in all honesty, that my best education was my history education. That I'm a political science major. I have my master's degree is in political science and with a major in constitutional law. Those things are important, but it was my history training that gave me a sense for what had worked and what hadn't worked, and to help me keep perspective as policy options were thrown at me. And so I would tell people that if you're looking to become a policymaker, get some history training, because it provides you with the right kind of foundation.
Okay.
To follow up on that, to take it from a different angle, it seems like a lot of the members of Congress now and a lot of politicians come from a law background, that they go to law school, they become lawyers, and they get elected. And you were a teacher, Dennis Hastert was a teacher. Do you think, are we reaching a point where you almost have to go to law school before you can run for office? Is it getting harder to come from a different background and make it into politics?
Well, look, lawyers have always been
Sure.
political people, because the fact is that you can leave your law practice, run for office, win or lose. Your law practice is probably enhanced by it because you get your name out. And so lawyers have always been a part of this, and plus the fact they're steeped in the law, so
Sure.
it is something that fits. I actually think there are more people who are non-lawyers in government today
Okay.
than there have been before, and they come from a variety of backgrounds. The real discriminator in politics today is whether or not you can raise the money to run for office, because
Yeah.
it's extremely expensive, and the ability to raise enough money to be a viable candidate is really the discriminator.
Do you think that that's gotten worse since your time
Oh,
in Congress?
it's much worse in the 20 years that I've been out of Congress. Today, campaigns that used to cost a few tens of thousands to run, say $30,000 or $40,000 to run in Lancaster County, are now costing millions.
Okay.
So I mean, that just is a totally different kind of atmosphere.
It also seems that this sort of professional political class has built up around all of that money, that
Yep.
with the super PACs and with the high profile consultants who are almost TV stars in their own rights, that
Yeah,
is
that's
contributing
that's
to
a
the
problem. And the real problem is that as a result of so-called reforms that we did back in the 70s, we have weakened the political parties. It used to be that one of the discriminators in this was that the political parties would in fact endorse candidates, that they would be the filter through which candidates came, and then they would raise the money. And today, you have all these independent operations, including super PACs and so on, who are the ones who exercise the financial power, and I think that's a huge mistake.
Well, and building on not even just the 70s, but with McCain-Feingold, it seems like the unintended consequence of that is the creation of the super PACs that have further weakened the parties.
That's exactly right. The fact is that McCain-Feingold built upon these so-called reforms from the mid-70s. And what happened in the mid-70s was individual people running for office were given the power to conduct the campaigns rather than utilizing the parties. And as I say, I think that has turned out to be a mistake.
Okay, yeah. Do our Walker Fellows have follow-ups to that?
Do, yes. As the congressman representing the 16th District of Pennsylvania, can you maybe discuss how it was splitting time between seeing your constituents here in Pennsylvania and maybe being seen also in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first of all, I mean, the greatest honor that somebody can be given in our system, in our constitutional system, is to be selected by your fellow citizens to represent them in the United States Congress. So I took that very seriously. And what I believed was that I needed to be back in the district all the time. And so for the entire time I was in the Congress, I was back and forth every week. It's been a long tradition in this district, going clear back to Thaddeus Stevens, to be able to do that. And that was important to me because it gave me, again, a foundation off which to build. If I was back home listening to what people were really saying as compared to what people in Washington were saying, it allowed me, I thought, to be an effective representative. And I tried to take the honor that was given to me to represent the people of this district well.
Do you think that is it harder for your colleagues who are, say, from a place like Utah to do that? Because, Washington, D.C., I did multiple day trips to D.C. when I was a kid with my parents, so it's a little bit easier, but you got to fly back and forth to Utah. How does, do any of your colleagues who live longer distance from DC, give you some insight into their experience.
Oh
with
yeah,
that.
no, and that's one of the issues is that the leadership in the Congress, and I was in the leadership for about 10 years when I was in the Congress, is always faced with the people who want to go home and are headed for the West Coast, and therefore want to get out early on Thursday afternoon to be able to fly back to their districts, and they want to come in late on Monday so that they can fly back on Monday, and they have a full period of time in their districts.
Sure.
That today has become a source of controversy in Washington because many people believe then that truncates the schedule in Washington so much that they can't get their work done. So there is a conflict there. The fact is that most members these days try to get home pretty often, even if they're far away. I had a colleague who used to go home every week to Hawaii.
Wow.
Yeah, so you talk about a major commitment. There's a major commitment for you.
Okay. Wow. Do you have other questions from our Walker Fellows?
Not on the subject, no.
I had go ahead,
No.
Haley.
Nothing
No, okay,
further.
so I have two other questions, and then we can wrap up. Speak a little bit about the emotional toll of election night for the candidate. Like you said, one of the greatest honors is to be chosen by your constituents. What is the emotional toll of waiting to find out if you've been chosen?
Well, it's you're on pins and needles. You're comforted by the fact that you've done everything that you know how to do. I mean, if you're a candidate who hasn't done that, you've got a big problem that night.
Right.
But if you know that you and the people who support you have done everything that you can to win it, you're prepared to accept it if you lose. On the other hand, if you win, there's a kind of euphoria that's pretty hard for anybody to describe.
Right. Even just as a campaign manager, I've known that once or twice. Yeah, I know what you're talking
Right.
about. Yeah, so if you know that you left it all out on the field, so to speak, win or lose, you feel okay.
You feel as though.
But winning is better.
Yeah. Well, it's like being in the majority in Congress. Being in the majority is better. Well, and winning is better than losing in political campaigns. Sure.
So the last question, since we're reflecting on a career in public service, one of my favorite political sayings, and I've heard it attributed to Bob Dole, but I've also heard that it was someone else who first said it, and Dole kind of popularized it, is that the only cure for presidential aspiration is embalming fluid. And so it's in the blood, it's in the system always, and I wonder if that applies to the life of politics in general. Is it the only cure for Bob Walker is embalming fluid? That like if someone asked you right now, Congressman Walker, we need you back, you would be right there heading back into the game? No,
I wouldn't. I enjoy being in the game in helping friends of mine get elected to office, but I really don't have a particular interest in running for office again. I spent 30 years on Capitol Hill, 20 of them as an elected congressman. I thought that that was a good career, and I think what I've been able to do since has been very rewarding and has allowed me to do things I wouldn't have been able to do had I stayed in public life. And so that's not true. But I agree with you that when people catch the presidential bug, it is very, very difficult to ever put it aside.
It's there for life.
That's an absolutely true statement. The other true statement is that the 100 members of the Senate look in the mirror every morning and say to themselves, you could be president.
Yep, look in the mirror and see a potential president.
That's right.
Right, yes. Well, I want to thank you, Congressman Walker, for sitting down with us, and our Walker Fellows, Chris and Haley, for such great questions. I thought this was a great discussion. I'm Robert Spicer, and thank you for watching, and thank you very much.